Welcome to Do It Now, a platform for you to learn from those that have already done it. Do it now.
Gord, thanks very much for coming on and Do It Now podcast. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Adam. Great to join you.
It was William Crawford who had suggested to ask you to come on, so I take William's judgment quite good, so I went with it, sent you a wee message, and it's nice to finally speak to you. Obviously, we'd been friends on Facebook, but you stay in Canada and I stay in Scotland, so we've not actually met each other as yet. But thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm glad to join you. I watched Willie's podcast with you, and actually learned a lot about. And I've known him for more than 20 years, and I still learned a lot about him. I like these sorts of things, Adam. I think they help people kind of get a feeling for what works and what doesn't. Certainly in business as well, and networking, stuff like that.
I think it's maybe something that's missing a little bit. I was trying to search it on the internet before obviously I'd done this, and I was trying to find things that were going on in Britain that were quite similar. People promoting companies and trying to find out how to start up businesses, if there was anything on YouTube for podcasts, and I couldn't really find anything, to be honest with you. So also hoping to network with the people as well, so that I could get ideas off them and try and talk with them, but I'm struggling as yet to find anybody. There's obviously things been posted, but nobody's doing anything which is a continuous program where they're talking to business people or entrepreneurs or stuff like that. So it's something that I'm hoping to try and get people thinking about, especially younger folk. It's something I wasn't thinking about. There's a big part of Scottish culture, Gord, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but there's a big part of Scottish culture which is just kind of obsessed with all the wrong stuff, and it leads to a career. It leads to a path that just, we all know it's no. Everybody knows where it's leading to. It's not leading to somewhere good. No doubt it's the same in Canada as it's the same across the world probably, but it'd be good, I think, to kind of highlight people that are doing well, like Willie.
Yeah.
People that are doing well. I thought it really interesting that at 42 he had credit card debt, and now he's got a nice big salary, although he wouldn't divulge that to us. But I know he's doing quite well. I got to find it out actually off the podcast, but obviously it's not something you would share with folk. But it's a comfortable life, and he's not going to have to work. He'll put the hours in, and he'll need to do things. It's a demanding role, and there'll be pressure in it. But I wouldn't presume it will be 50, 60 hours a week. It'll probably be a lesser role now that he's doing. It'll probably be 40 hours a week, and everything will be done remotely. He'll be talking through the laptop and stuff, so it's no physically demanding. He's on a massive bumper salary, and that type of lifestyle is something it's better to achieve than the kind of narrative that's set. I just want to share that story with folk, kind of thing, that you can think about your career path, and things can change at times, but just try and get folk thinking about their careers basically, and trying to change the narrative a wee bit about what's cool and folks what is a success story basically in Scotland.
I sent Billy a message after I watched the podcast, and I call him Billy. I always have. I know you guys call him Willie. I know he's got a few other names too that we won't go into, but I said to him I couldn't believe how similar. I mean, lots of differences, obviously, but a similar sort of situation that he and I had throughout our careers, in that, you know, like you said, at 42, he was basically starting over. I had a situation like that too in my career path, and it started from kind of a similar place. So I think that's why he messaged you, actually, just to let you know that it might be an interesting conversation, and certainly there's some parallels there too.
Right, okay. Gord, what I've tried to do is split it into 5 sections, just questions. So the first part's introduction, second part's first jobs, third part is career paths, fourth part is your business, and the last part's the final note. So if I could just run through the questions with you, and then, as I say, I know nothing about you. We've just got to know each other over this Zoom meeting here, and I'll just go through the questions, and I'll get to know you as we progress. So first part, introduction. Who are you? What line of business are you in? And what area geographically does your company operate currently?
So I'm the executive director of the Kingstone Humane Society. That's very much like the RSPCA in Britain. We care for abused, neglected, unwanted stray animals in Kingston. Kingston is a small town kind of halfway between Toronto and Montreal in the province of Ontario in Canada. And I've been there for about 2 years. And it's a great job. I love it. I look back, I'm 57 now, and I look back and never could have imagined even 15 years ago myself in this role. And yet I feel really comfortable. I have a great team. We do great work. And I love being in not-for-profit because at the end of the day, you feel like you've done something for your community. And that to me is really important. And I have a decent life and a good wage. I'm not going to get rich anytime soon, but I don't want for anything. I can travel over to Scotland when I want to. I can travel throughout Canada when I want to. So yeah, I mean, things are going pretty well for me at this point, better than I would have anticipated, as I said, even 15 or 20 years ago.
Nice to hear. So executive director, does that mean you're at the very top of the whole of the organisation?
Yeah, as far as operationally, yeah, I direct operations for the Kingston Humane Society. I answer to a board of directors. They're volunteers, and they oversee the vision of the organization long term. My job is to make sure we day to day have enough funds. We go out and get, and 70% of the revenue we get is from donations. So a lot of work is working with our donors and supporters and trying to engage people in what we do, and hopefully they're interested enough to donate money to us. And then we also run events throughout the year. And so I oversee that whole thing. There's budgets involved, and there's pretty much anything that you would imagine in a private organization or private enterprise. It's the same sort of thing, except at the end of the day, our goal is to have spent most of the money we get to support the animals and make sure that we get them into better homes.
You said you quite liked the fact that it was a non-profit organisation that you're involved in. So I take it it's quite good for you, good feeling to earn a living where you're providing a good service. That it's a good kind of moral duty, and it's there's a good feeling in providing something with substance and earning money off the back of that. Would you say that's true, Gord?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I've worked in private enterprise. I've worked in municipal governments. I've had quite a varied career path. It's zigged and zagged all the way through. But the enjoyment I get from working for my community is much more than anything I've ever done. So it's something I'll continue in until I retire, I'm sure.
Great, cool. I'll move on to the next section. Gord, first jobs. Where did you first work? Very first job?
Very first job actually was a summer job while I was still in school, and I ended up working there for 11 years later on. It was in a recycled paper factory. We took newspaper, and at that time computer printouts and paper and cardboard, mixed it all up and created the kind of cardboard that you would use for cereal boxes and for detergent boxes at the time. So Bristol board, named after the city of Bristol, England, actually, is kind of what we made. So I worked there in the summer, and then went to school for broadcasting, radio broadcasting. I worked a little bit in radio broadcasting in both the production end of things, so producing commercials, and also in sales. But it's a hard job to stay in. You have to be really dedicated, Adam. You have to be willing to make very little money to travel everywhere, because you don't ever stay in one place too long. Most people that work in radio broadcasting move along 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times in their career. And it's really tough to make any decent wage. So at that time I had a young family. So I started working back in the paper mill that I'd worked in the summer, and I worked there for 11 years. But it's the first place where I really understood how networking can help you. So as I reached about maybe the 7th or 8th year, I started working with the union at the paper mill. It was the Communication, Energy, and Paper Workers Union. And I was on the union executive, and we got to a point where we were waiting to sign a contract with a company and couldn't get anything going. And so we went on strike, and they turned to me to ask if we could get some media attention during the strike. And of course, I had worked in radio broadcasting, so I had lots of contacts in the media. And so I reached out to them, and probably within 4 hours of the strike being declared, I had our people on the radio, on television. We had cameras there. And unfortunately, it worked against me because when they settled the strike, the management were not too happy with me. And so they made enough people redundant to get up high enough to me to lay me off. But that worked out really well for me, to be honest with you, Adam, because I went back to school. I took information technology, worked in computers for a couple of years, worked for a company that did database management and database design here in Kingston, then worked for a school board for a year, but again, found that I really didn't like it that much. So I moved over to work in, for my first not-for-profit, the World Breast Cancer Organization, doing IT for them and developing websites and things like that. And at one point, the executive director there had to leave, and I was moved up into the interim executive director role. So I got my first taste of not-for-profit management, and I really liked it. And so I kind of moved in that direction. And I worked for the Ottawa Humane Society for a couple of years. And then my first relationship did not work out. So I came back home to Kingston and started working for St. John Ambulance. You guys will be familiar with St. John Ambulance. They provided first aid at events and taught people CPR and first aid. I worked there for 10 years. And then just 2 years ago, I was hired away from there by the Kingstone Humane Society. So like I said, a varied career for sure. In between there, I worked for a little while as a reporter. I've always considered myself a writer. So I worked for a newspaper, a weekly newspaper, writing 8 to 10 articles a week, covering everything from municipal government meetings to local hockey games. So like I said, a varied career, but throughout that time, I gathered all the people I knew in each of those fields and kind of created this big database of people I know and can go to for different things. So I still have great friends from radio and television from 35 years ago. I still have great friends in all kinds of different arenas that I go to for assistance if I need it, or to help with events, for volunteer work, all kinds of things. So the networking has really played, it's been a constant throughout that. And I think it's one of the reasons why I've always kind of landed on my feet, moving from job to job.
I'm trying to build that network myself as well, Gord. I recently identified that not too long ago. It's massive, that knowing people, keeping in contact with them, sending them text messages now and again, and giving them a wee phone call and just saying hello to people you meet along the way. It helps a massive deal if things arise and you need to move career or you need to move places, and you can more options with more people you keep in contact. I totally agree with that. So you took the words out of my mouth. You were saying they're a very, very varied career. Can I take you back right to the start? I think you said you worked in a paper mill and you moved from paper mill into broadcasting. Can you take me back to how did you get the first job? How did you land the first job at the paper mill? And then how did the transition to broadcasting?
Yeah, and it was actually, I worked in radio broadcasting and then at the paper mill. But essentially, the way I got the job at the paper mill was my father worked upstairs in the office. And in those days, everybody that worked in that mill had a connection, whether it was a father, a brother, an uncle, a cousin. That's how they hired back then. That was from 86 to 97, I worked there. That changed nearing the end of my time there. They would more likely or less likely to hire family, but in those days, that's just how it worked. So I was lucky enough, and I had worked there in the summertime too, so I had some experience. So it was easy enough to move into a laborer's role, just doing whatever I could, kind of whatever hours they had, into a full-time role. And from that, moving out of there, I went back to school and got some certificates to work in information technology.
Right, okay, so you put yourself back into school after the mill. And broadcasting, how did that come about? How was that through?
So in high school, I didn't finish my grade 13. I had in grade 13, so we went back in those days. You went 5 years in high school. In the fifth year, you you needed 6 credits to finish your year, and I had 5 credits. And I had all kinds of issues back then, like we all do as teenagers, I think. And so I decided I couldn't go to university because I needed that extra credit, but I could go to what we call community college. So I went, and I liked radio broadcasting, like the idea of being a disc jockey. So I went to school for a couple of years and started working in radio broadcasting. But as I said, it's a tough field to work in, and I didn't have the big voice for it. I didn't have the commitment to move. Like, we had people leaving, not finishing, not getting their diploma, moving 14 hours away and working overnights for $9,000 a year. I mean, it was, you really had to want that job, and I didn't want it enough, I guess.
Right, I see. I think was lots of work available then in radio broadcasting, so you could go.
There was then.
There was then, so you could walk into a job. So it wasn't very hard. You just had to make a phone call, or did you know?
Yeah. So a lot of the connections we made in those days were through our teachers. They knew people, and we said, you know, we kind of focused on one field, whether you wanted to be on the air or in production or doing news or doing sports. But there were all kinds of jobs in radio back then. I would guess it's kind of similar in the UK. Those jobs have disappeared very largely, have become programmed out of one central place, lots of syndication, fewer and fewer jobs.
I think you said the next move that you made was into non-profit organisation. Was it, I can't remember, was it something to do with hearts? Was it?
Yeah, so it was a World Breast Cancer Organization, which was an organization that basically our focus was to do a conference every year for women who were survivors of breast cancer. So our job was to get funding, sponsors, organize it, find the location. And I worked with a small team, but a really good team. And that's the thing I really love about not-for-profit, Adam. I think probably if I was to distill it, aside from the feeling that at the end of the day, you've done something for your community, it's the fact that most of the not-for-profits I've worked for have been relatively small. And so everybody does everything, because your goal is to just make sure that the organization does its job. It's not as much a goal, you know, there are often times in private enterprise where people are working just to, you know, for themselves, to make sure that they have enough money. And that's fine. It's not a judgment call there at all. But I love the fact that we're all working together. So there'll be times when I would answer the phone. There'll be times when I'd be doing, you know, creating a website. There'll be times when I'd be talking to our major sponsors, which was a large bank here in Canada. At that time, they're multinational now, called Scotiabank. So there were all kinds of different things that you'd be doing on a day-to-day basis. And the variety of the work was what I really loved, and I still love to this day.
How did that come about, Gord?
So they posted for a job, and I had been working at a school board there was an enterprise software called PeopleSoft, which basically does everything for an organization. And the school board that I worked for was a large school board. So this software did accounting and human resources and budgeting and all kinds of stuff. And it was so big that it required patches every week. And that became my job, was taking these fixes to the software, testing them, making sure they worked, putting them in place. They would break other things. I would get new patches the next week. So it became a really monotonous job. So I was looking for other work and saw this become available and applied for it and got it. And I really enjoyed it.
Okay. From the three of them, the three different careers or places you worked, you mentioned each one. I'm going back to the paper mill. And if you can put it into as little words as you can think of, what you learned for there, how you grew, what you took for that role.
I can put it in a very short sentence. I learned I didn't want to work in a factory and work shift work for the rest of my life. And I had done it for 11 years. When I got that pink slip, I looked at it and I thought, that's 11 years of my life gone, doing a job that I really didn't enjoy. It was hard, hot, sticky, dirty work. It was a good group of guys that I worked with, but I didn't like the work and I didn't like the shift work. So that was, I actually got a tattoo on my shoulder. nothing to do with the job, but it was a signpost. It was to remind myself that I'm never going back to that kind of job. I want to move forward into something where I feel better about myself.
Right, I see. And the next profession or the next career where you were broadcasting, if you could do the same with that.
Yeah, the broadcasting actually happened before the paper mill, and it was fun, but it wasn't really a career for me. I worked for a year in a radio station here in Kingston, about a year at a radio station just down the road from here. A great group of people, a lot of fun. It was like being back in high school again, but not a career for me for sure.
Right.
And then after that, when I worked in IT, again, picked up a lot of information on using computers, and focused on all that information, took that forward into working in not-for-profit, and that moved me into an interim executive director role, because our executive director at that point had gone. And so I realized, hey, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could take what I've learned and move it into a management role and be the kind of manager I always wanted to work for. And that's been kind of my mantra ever since, to be the kind of manager that people really like to work for, the kind of manager that I wanted to work for when I was younger.
There was something I thought about earlier on that I didn't want to stray off track, but basically I think you'd mentioned that it was a small company and everybody does everything within the organisation, but you're working towards a goal. You're working towards a goal, and it struck a chord with me because I've been involved with a couple of different PLC companies, and when you if you're maybe fully time employed with these guys, they take on a certain mindset. Everybody within the company is working towards the company goal, which is a profit at the end of the day, and everything else gets pushed aside. Nothing else matters whatsoever. And what strikes me is a couple of things with the non-profits you've been involved in. There must be a great deal of satisfaction of knowing that your end product is the goal. It's no profit. The end product of what you see as a living. You're all earning a living, I presume, off it as well, maybe a good living as well, but the end product is the company ethos. It's not how much money can we make off of this, it's how well can we deliver this product.
That's a great description. It's exactly what it is. You're all working towards, as opposed to working towards a profit for some corporation, you're working towards making your community better, whether it's helping people, women with breast cancer, or it's helping people learn how to save lives with CPR, or helping to save animals and put them into new homes. You're all working towards that goal. And so there's a different feeling there where sometimes you might get a little jaded and think, okay, I'm getting paid X number of dollars, but I'm making a ton of money for this corporation, and this corporation, the owners or the executives are taking holidays, and you create that us and them. There's no us and them and not for profit. It's everybody on the same team working towards the same goal. It actually is a lot like a sports team or an athletic group of people working towards the same goal. You're all focused and everybody's got a skill set, but everybody's working towards the same end goal.
Sounds satisfying. Sounds like having a career like that sounds satisfying to me. To be able to provide for yourself, but at the same time provide for everybody around about you. I think there's something massive to be said in that. I also think that maybe we need a lot more companies and organisations like the one you're involved in. Maybe we need to get in the mindset of creating culture. Culturally, we need to get into the mindset of, if there's stuff not right and we want to see change in it, then it's up to each individual or us to come together and do different things. I had a change of heart and thought pattern maybe about 2 years ago, where previously, Gord, this is getting into a little bit of kind of politics talk, which I didn't really want to do, but previously I had quite socialist ideas, maybe before 2 years ago. You were expecting the government to do everything. I'm wondering why the government aren't doing this. I'm wondering why they're not fixing that. I'm wondering why they're not fixing the next thing. But the government mismanages your money and provides a really bad service. and it squanders your money as well. It's just inevitable the way it goes. It's just the way it works, and they provide bad services. If you want to see, it's up to private entities to create the things, the change that you want to see, rather than expecting the government to do it, which taxes and then provides a slow service because of the bureaucracy above it and all that sort of stuff. So I think more businesses where we're challenged, more businesses in line that are profitable, which are making society better as a whole, is the direction that we want to go. Whereas previously I used to always ask, why is the government not doing this? But I'm starting to recognise you don't want to give more power to the government, you want to give less, and you want to do things for yourself. Don't ask, why are you not doing it? Why are you not doing it? That's what
I think it's ideally, yeah, that's exactly what you want. I do believe the government needs to provide a social safety net for people. That's my own personal belief. But you're right, the government isn't always. Oftentimes, the politics of things, they're more interested in maintaining power than they are in assisting the people that put them in power. So we have to fill in the loopholes. We have to do the things that the government isn't doing well, and whether that's helping out with abused and neglected animals, or it's a homeless shelter, or it's a food sharing organization. Those places are becoming more and more essential to a good life and a good community.
Totally. I was just thinking there back to the questioning, Gord. How did you do at school then, Gord?
That's a whole long conversation, Adam. I did okay. I loved writing. I still love writing to this day. If you were to ask me a point blank question, how do you see yourself? The first image I have of myself is as a writer. I write a blog for the Humane Society. I'm just getting ready to launch my own blog. I have posted things occasionally through social media. For a year and a bit, I wrote as a full-time writer and reporter for a newspaper. I also, as a volunteer, wrote pieces for our local newspaper, columns, opinion pieces for, I don't know, the better part of 10 years. And I've done freelance writing over that time as well for magazines. So that's where I feel the most comfortable, when I'm sitting at a keyboard, communicating ideas and trying to provoke emotional responses in people. That's where I feel the strongest. It's a skill that I put to use, except for at the paper mill, where I didn't have that opportunity, obviously. I put to use in every other job I've had. And I got some great advice from somebody once, which was, I was complaining, I haven't really written that thing. When you're a writer, your goal is to write. I write prose, so maybe a novel or a long form piece or something like that people will read. And I was complaining about that. And this fellow said to me, well, you write every day though. You write emails and you write stuff at work. So treat each thing like that you write, whether it's a press release or a memo that's going out to staff, or just an email, as that piece of writing that you want to create. And it taught me something really key, which is that the written word is so key in communication. It's so important. And if I put my energy into that, I feel like at the end of the day, even if I've just, I've fired off 10 or 12 emails to people inside where I work or external to where I work, I feel like I've done something productive and done it well enough that I feel satisfied at the end of the day.
Because of the quality of your writing, God?
Yeah, I work on it all the time, and I learned a lot when I wrote I wrote 6 to 8 pieces a week for the newspaper, and when I wrote columns for the newspaper, from the editors who would take it and look at it and make big changes. And sometimes they would edit out my favorite parts, Adam, and I would get angry at first and think, why did they do that? But I learned very quickly that they know a lot more than I do about the writing process. And so I learned to write to their style. So by the last few columns that I wrote for the local newspaper here, they weren't changed at all. So that's where I learned to be careful, and I learned, the importance of proofreading and and streamlining my communications. Sometimes I get a little too flowery.
Okay. So if you were earning money through freelance writing for newspapers, how did that come about, Gord? How did you go about doing that?
So there was a request for applications to be on the community editorial board of my local newspaper. It was a volunteer position. You were asked to write, I think at that point they wanted you to write 6 short columns per year on anything just related to the community we lived in. So you had to send in a piece, and I wrote a piece, and they accepted it, and I got on the editorial board, and they told us at that point, you could write more if you want, and I took them at their word. So instead of 6 pieces that year, I might have written 15, and the next year I kept submitting pieces. So I was fairly regularly a contributor to our local newspaper, and then I wrote actually a long form piece about a trip I made with Joe Durso. And it was my first trip to Scotland, even though my family's from Scotland. I hadn't been there. So this was in 2001. And I wrote, I think it ended up being 2,800 words. And it was published in the Weekend magazine and got a lot of attention. And so then I started submitting things to magazines as a freelance writer. It's a tough business. I suppose you could make a living at it, Adam, but again, written like magazines and things like that are few and far between now. So it was I haven't written anything freelance in a couple of years. I still consider myself a freelance writer, but it's a tough business to make a living from, for sure. But it's also very satisfying to see your thoughts and words in a magazine and to get feedback on how it affects people.
What was being edited out? What were what was being edited out? What did you notice? What were the was there a certain topic? Was there a connection between what was being edited out?
No, it was more stylistic. It was more, the use of, maybe they shortened my sentences. Maybe I learned to write within what's called the Canadian press style. So there's certain things that are expected in terms of the way you describe things, the way you format quotes, things like that. So it was mostly formatting and style that they were editing for, sometimes for length as well. And sometimes what I realized was I was creating this great paragraph, I thought, of what I was describing, but the idea was getting lost in what I was, so they would pare it down and I would realize, oh yeah, that gets the idea across much more quickly than my 6 or 7 sentence paragraph.
So it was more about what the article was trying to say rather than what the writer's thoughts on the article was. That's what you had to cut out. So whatever the story was, you had to be more specific about the story, and less specific about how you felt about the story.
Yeah, oftentimes you're removing your emotions from something communicates things more quickly and more directly. But sometimes you want emotions. Certainly in the blogs that I write for the Humane Society, we want to communicate the emotion of some of the things that we see and some of the animals that we deal with.
Let's get into that, Gord, then. Obviously, that's your current career. How did that come about initially? I know you mentioned something in there, but if you could go into a wee bit of depth about how it came about, maybe your first day and how you applied and who you met, and just a wee bit of depth about how you landed.
Sure.
That.
So I was the executive director at St. John Ambulance here in town, local St. John Ambulance branch. Was figuring that I'd spend the remainder of my career there, and I was recruited by the Humane Society, asked if I was interested in a position, asked if I would submit an application, and then I went for an interview, and it all went very well. And so I started there end of April 2019. And it's, anytime you move from a comfortable job, I was at St. John Ambulance for 10 years. I had a good team there. I knew my role. We were successful. Anytime you move from that, it's a little frightening, but that can be really good for you. That can, open you up to being excited. So I found that the first day that you asked me about my first day, I was really excited. Normally I had been, the alarm goes off. Maybe I hit the snooze button once or twice, not really excited about getting up and going to work. that first day, I was up well before the alarm and ready to go and at work early. And to this day, that hasn't changed. I'm excited about what we can do to help these animals, what we can do to get them into new homes, and what we can do as an organization to better animal welfare in our community. So it was a really good change. I have made changes in the past that haven't worked out. I mentioned earlier on when I worked at a school board, I didn't like that job at all. I went there because they offered me a lot more money than I was making at my previous job at the database company. And that was a mistake. And I learned that, fairly quickly, and had to start looking for something else. But everything got me to this point. So I can't really look back and say it was a mistake, because without that, I might not have moved on to work in not-for-profit in the IT field, and then move into management from there.
The school board that you work for, just before we go into your current career, if I could ask you a wee bit about the school board role.
Sure.
What did you learn from there, if you could kind of put into a small paragraph or two what you took from it? Anything, whatever it may be.
Probably the two biggest things that I took away from that job were, if someone offers you a lot of money, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a great job. And B, monotony is, for me, it's the worst thing possible. If you're doing the same thing every day with no possibility for change, no possibility to move into something else, I know there may be people that love that. That may be people that love to just turn off and, do what they do. And that, again, it's no judgment. It just didn't work for me at all. And so those are the two big takeaways for me. Salary isn't the most important thing. And if your job allows for a variety of things, I'm much more likely to be happy.
God, you've kind of put into words my thoughts over the last while about careers and the value that's in them. Over the last, I've been thinking that careers that are attached, just like you were saying there, or we were talking about a minute ago, the careers that are attached to something with substance, I think provides a lot more for you, just internally, in your life. I think you sound as if you're in a good place, Gord. You're happy with your career, and you've obviously done numerous things throughout the year, but you sound as if you're in a good place with your career and you're happy in life at the moment. Sounds as if you're doing good with it, and I think that's probably got a big part to play with it, because if the company that you were working for, it was a soulless entity, it just doesn't provide it. There must be hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in that position, God, throughout the world.
Yeah, I bet there are, Adam. And the one thing I would say to them, if there's someone listening and thinking, I'm in one of those jobs that just it doesn't feel good, the biggest step is to make the change and move to something else. That's the toughest thing. It takes. I didn't see it at the time. Moving from working in a factory setting to going back to school to working in information technology, I didn't see then the courage that it takes. I see it now and look back and go, yeah, it did take. I don't tend to give myself that credit, that to look back and go, yeah, it was a big step, but it was. And it took a friend of mine, a hockey buddy of mine, to point that out, to say to me, good for you. That's a big step. And I said, oh, no, it wasn't. He goes, no, it was a big step. It takes courage to move into something brand new to you, to have faith in yourself that you're going to do well in that field. And then, to move on to something else. Each of those steps takes a little bit of courage, sometimes a lot of courage. And you have to step back and give yourself credit. When you look at a career over a long period of time, you can look back and go, yeah, I get it. That was a tough move, but it may be better in the long run. So
I agree with your friend, Gord. I agree with him. It's quite two different roles, from the paper mill to broadcasting. There's been various things, so the change is quite drastic throughout there. It's maybe quite a good message, that, because of you can retrain. I don't know if you mind me asking, but what age were you roughly when all this was going on? Were you quite young, or was this in your kind of 30s?
Yeah. So 97, I was 34 years old.
34
So
years old.
that's when I left the paper mill. So there's still I still have friends that work there today, and they they like their job, and that's great. And they're good people. They provided a good living for the family. They have a nice home, a nice life. It just didn't work for me. So yeah, it's tough. I had at that point 2 children. One was 7 and one was 10, and that's pretty tough to do because at my age I grew up thinking I'm supposed to be the person that supports my family. I understand now that that's not the case. That that men and women, mothers and fathers equally support the family, and that's the way it should be. But I grew up in a bit of a different era under a different understanding. So that was my thought, was I have to support my family. So going back to school was not that. It was taking a year off, and I was subsidized by the government. So essentially, it would be like employment insurance, but to go back to school. So they paid for my school, and they paid me a small amount of money per week to live on. It was tough. It was a tough go, but I came out the other side of it a better person. So again, that would be my advice. And I've given this advice to young people who've talked to me and said they're stuck in a rut. They don't really like their job. I've said to them, well, what do you like? And often the response is, well, I like this, but I can't make a living out of that. And I always say, don't discount that. You can make a living out of that, or you can incorporate that into a better living for yourself, or something that you feel better about.
I think there's a message in there that would say you've made a big leap. First of all, you've went to retrain yourself at the age of 34 with 2 kids there, which is massive. It's a massive leap to try and take, and obviously that would have been quite scary in a totally different role. But it didn't quite work out for you, for the sounds of things, of broadcasting. But it then led on to what you're doing currently, which you really, really like. I know there was various careers in the middle of that, but in the long run of things, it worked out. Whereas you could have been still in the paper mill 30, 40 years later, and that could have been your one career throughout your whole life, Gord.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of scary when I look at that. To be honest with you, the worst part of that for me was we worked 12-hour shifts. So if you worked on Monday and Tuesday, you had Wednesday and Thursday off, and then you worked all weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the night shifts in there were long and sometimes incredibly difficult, and sometimes very, very boring. In the summertime, the temperature inside would be, well over 100 degrees. Sometimes if the paper broke off, you'd have to go underneath the steam dryers where it was 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'd be under there sometimes for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes in a whole 12-hour shift, you barely get out of there. So it was a difficult job, and there were parts of it where I felt a lot stronger then. I was pretty strong and pretty in pretty good shape, but mentally I just felt like I wasn't using any of my skills and my knowledge, and I felt a little bit like it was withering away. So I was glad to put myself to the test and go back to school and do well enough that I could succeed in a field and then move into a bit of a different field with that little those extra tools.
Do you think that's quite an important thing, Gord, to challenge yourself? The previous role that you were in the paper mill, was it quite repetitive and didn't it really challenge you mentally, or it was quite a repetitive role? Do you think that's been quite a good thing for you in the years going through, challenging yourself on different things you had no idea about? Is that, I guess that's something you've definitely lived through.
Yeah, and I can see it when I look back at it, Adam. I couldn't necessarily see it as I was doing it, but I could definitely see it as I look back now. they were big challenges, a challenge to take on a role as a manager in a not-for-profit. I had never prepared a full organizational budget before, including every expenditure, every line of revenue, making sure that at the bottom, you're not in a deficit, you're in a surplus. All that stuff was new to me. And I can look back now and go, that was a hell of a challenge. That was a tough thing to take on. At the moment, it just felt like, okay, this is part of the job. And there were moments too where I felt what my older sister describes as imposter syndrome, where you feel like, oh, they've hired me, but they have no idea. I have no idea how to do any of this stuff. And I think that's familiar to a lot of people in new roles, where you think, oh, I've conned them. I did a great job on my job interview, and I've convinced them I can do this job. And you're sitting in the chair now and you're going, I don't know how to do any of this. But you just move forward. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. And oftentimes, especially early on in a career, you ask for help. And as long as you're honest about what the problem is, you generally will get help. If you don't, maybe it's the wrong organization and you move on. But generally, you can ask for help and get it, and put the nose to the grindstone, as they say, and get the work done. And then you look back and go, hey, yeah, I did that. I'm happy with that.
I know what you're talking about there when you go into a new career and you've just started and you're questioning yourself and questioning your own abilities, and you have to shout up for help now and again. But one thing I think I've maybe learned through the years is, when you're thinking about shouting up for help and you've thought that this is challenging, give yourself a wee bit of extra space before you shout up for help, because shouting up for help too much can be an issue, but it's always good to make sure you know. But give yourself a couple of days before you shout up for help, as much space as you can give yourself, mind space as you can give yourself before you shout up for it. Because sometimes you realise after you've shouted up for help that you knew the answer already.
That's really good advice, Adam, and that's absolutely true. I often do. I'll sit there and go, okay, what's wrong here? I can't quite figure this out. Let me step back for a second. Maybe in my case with my role at the Humane Society, I'll go and get a dog and take a dog for a walk. I'll come back with a fresh mindset and go, okay, what did I miss here? And oftentimes you're right. Oftentimes you have the information. It just takes a minute to step away and then look at it with a fresh set of eyes.
Something I've definitely learned over the last, not too long ago, God, I wish I'd learned a long time ago, but it's serving me better now, and just taking your time with stuff and learn to process it as long as it needs sometimes before you make actions of it. It's definitely something that's helped us. So let's get into your current career in depth, if you could, God, give me quite an in-depth explanation of what you do.
Sure. So I would get, like, if I was to describe the main role I have, it's to make sure that we have enough revenue to operate. So what we do is we take in stray animals, surrendered animals, so people can't care for their dog or cat anymore, and abused and neglected animals that come to us either from inspectors, animal welfare inspectors, or from the public. And we take those dogs and we rehabilitate them, whether it's socializing them, whether it's simply doing a spay and neuter on them so that they, we don't want animals out there just reproducing at will, and vaccinating them. And then we find them a home. And in order to do that, obviously, we need revenue. And 70%, as I said, 70% of our revenue comes from supporters, from local community donors who are willing to help us. So a lot of my role is engaging people in the community who are animal lovers, who want to help us out, and saying, here's what you can do. There's lots of different ways you can help us with events. You can help us as a volunteer, or you can help us as a monthly donor or a one-time donation. So a lot of it is telling our story. A lot of it is connecting with people. Most recently, we had our biggest fundraiser of the year is a direct mail campaign. So it's 6,000 pieces of mail that go out directly to homes in the community, hoping that we're telling a story that people will want to help us with. And so the story we told was, we had 7 feral dogs that came to us. So dogs that were living with no human support, no interaction. They had actually dug dens into the ground to live in, basically. They came to us from animal control officers, and we had to re-socialize them and make sure they were healthy and find them homes. And that's a tough thing to do. So when you tell the public, here's what happened, this is the situation we're in, we need your help, it's amazing how they'll step up and help, Adam. It's still to this day incredible to me that people are willing to say, okay, what do you need? Here's a check for $250, $500, $1,000. It's just astounding to me that people are always willing to help us. So my job is to tell the story, make sure the public knows the stories of the animals that we deal with, and the staff are absolutely incredible. So as executive director, I'm also responsible for human resources. So to oversee, the staff we have, to make sure that everybody's happy, safe, has the tools they need, and knows the goals of each particular role. Also to monitor expenditures, and to look at our business overall and say, okay, what are the big things we need? For the Kingstone Humane Society, our building is very old. It's been there. That building has been around since the early 70s or mid 70s. We've only been in there since 1994, but it's too small and too old for the proper care for the animals. In the summertime, it's way too warm and humid. In the wintertime, it can be cold. So we want a new building. And so I work with the board to go out to the public and see the interest in helping us get funding for a new building. So it's a new thing every day, every morning when I get to my office, or these days working from right here at my desk at home. It's a new challenge, whether it's most recently we had a Rottweiler that gave birth to 5 puppies, and we got 3 of the puppies were up for adoption, and we got 250 applications for 3 puppies. So we had to work through that, and we had to create, the process for deciding on who would be the best families for these 3 puppies. It's interesting, it's new, and I have a great team of staff members who are all working towards the same thing. So in the end, I'm a happy guy at the end of the day if we've communicated our need, if we've engaged the public in what we do, and if the staff are satisfied and happy that they're helping us as well.
It sounds like you've got a bit of creative license to think of ways to create revenue for your organisation. That's one of your main roles. How many staff do you have under looking after Gord?
16 full-time and 28 total. So 16 full-time and about 12 part-time.
Right, okay. What area do you cover geographically? How large an area do you cover?
It's a pretty large area. If I was to put it in terms of Scotland, it would be probably at least the size of Ayrshire, maybe a little bigger.
Right, okay. County size. What have you found the hardest parts of this current career? How did you overcome it?
The toughest thing is to see the animals that have been abused. I get emotional if I talk about it too much, because just to see the treatment of animals, that people are willing to treat animals that way, it makes me angry, but it also it really affects me. We had at one point, we had this, it wasn't much more than a crack house, to be honest with you, Adam. It was a motel, but it was about to be torn down, and there was someone living in there with a whole bunch of beagle puppies and adult beagles. And so the animal welfare inspectors went in, they seized the animals, brought them to us. And when I saw the shape that some of these animals were in, it just stopped me cold. Like, I just could not believe anybody could mistreat animals like that. That's far and away the toughest thing. The positives there are we're able, for the most part, to treat those animals, get them healthy, and get them into families that we know will care for them. And that's the bonus. And I don't know how often I've heard friends say to me, I don't know how you do that job, Gord, because how can you handle those animals? And I tell them there's no sugarcoating it. Sometimes some of the things we see are horrible. However, the positives outweigh the negatives. the fact that we put 17 or 1800 animals into homes with families, and we know they're going to live a long, wonderful life with those families, and those families are going to have a wonderful companion animal with them for the 10, 15, maybe even if they're lucky 20 years. Those are pretty incredible stories, and we get those stories from people all the time telling us what a difference the animal has made in their lives. So you have to look at the positives and look at the positive work you're doing to overcome the negative aspects.
Yeah, the negative aspects of that sound horrendous, Gord. Be hard to deal with. I love dogs. Dogs are my favourite. Love dogs to bits, and that must be really terrible to deal with. But as you were saying, that's the hardest part of your work. But overcoming that, how you've overcame that, is the service your company provides is to care for these dogs, and that's so overcome it is all the good stuff. So it's the positives out of it, all the dogs getting rehomed, or the dogs getting cared for, everything, all the other services you provide. So that's your focus is on that, the positives, instead of the dark side of what's going on there. And that's how you. Is there just at the last section on your business, is there anything else you feel worth mentioning about your business, or anything about your career, anything about you're working through the years that you feel's worth mentioning would be of use to?
I think like what we talked about at the very beginning of the networking, I've carried that through in every role I've had, whether it was in radio broadcasting and developing friends who I still work with today, whether it's reaching out to them and saying, hey, I've got a really interesting story for you guys. Would you like to do a story on this animal or this situation? Or, oftentimes those connections come just from living in an area for an amount of time and being willing to go out and talk to people. And I think that's something I learned, strangely enough, at the paper mill as a young man in an area where I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know. I could have spent every 12-hour shift all to myself, not talking to anybody, but that made for very long shifts. So I would go out of my comfort zone and speak to people and just get comfortable talking about whatever. It might have, the start of the conversation might have been about the weather, or might have been about, a particular sports team or something like that. But eventually you get comfortable talking to people and you engage them and you talk about their lives. And I became really comfortable with that in that role, and took it with me wherever I went. So I developed these great friendships and relationships that time and time again I go back to for assistance, whether it's sponsorship of an event at the Humane Society, or maybe somebody wants to donate some money and they're not quite sure, where they want to donate. I can direct them. Well, okay, you can help us here, or you can help this organization. It's funny, my staff, they shake their heads all the time because they'll bring up a name of someone locally who may have donated or may have asked a question, and I'll say, oh yeah, I think I know them, or yeah, I know them, and they're related to this person, or they do this, and I used to work with them, and they're always shaking their head saying, Gord, you know everybody. But really, it's just about being willing to go outside your comfort zone, engage people in conversation, and see where it goes.
Totally agree. As I was saying to you before we kind of started the podcast, I'm going to have to approach people and message people on this. I'm actually looking forward to it, if I'm honest, Gord. I'm going to get meet new people and network just like we're talking to, and then it opens doors, and it's good to network and get to know new people. And obviously the people I'm aiming for is all business owners, so I presume business owners and professionals in their field, people who've made careers for themselves, where they're financially stable and they're happy in their career and they're doing well for themselves. And I presume there's going to be some inspiration amongst it, and there's going to be some good stories amongst it. And I've really enjoyed talking to you tonight, Gord. I'm really pleased Willie suggested for you to come on. I've learnt a few things myself, and I'm just enjoying the conversation, and I've took a few things from it anyway. I'm looking forward to listening over when it's recorded. Obviously I have to listen to it a few times before it's edited. I'm looking forward to listening back already. So, Gord, so thanks very much for coming on before we even finish. But thanks very much for taking the time out, Gord. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I always I have a soft spot in my heart for Billy. I always call him my Scottish brother. And I have two sisters, but Billy and Tracy and Ryan, and so many people in beef that I've developed friendships with over the years just through knowing Billy. And even Billy was a networking experience when I was working. I also have done some music management and tour management. And so I've been in Scotland, and that was how I went to Scotland the first time, was as a tour manager for Joe Durso. And I've been back over there many times since in that role and just on holiday. But when I met Billy, I was working selling CDs and T-shirts for Joe Durso, and just Billy came out to buy a T-shirt and a CD, and shook his hand and told him about my Scottish heritage. And pretty soon, you know, we were connected as friends. And then I ran into him in New York, and the friendship really got cemented. And then he was coming to Canada, and I actually wrote a letter that I sent to the government supporting his application for work in Canada. And he actually then stayed at my mom and dad's house for a little while, kind of as a in between before they headed back to Scotland from their from being in Canada.
So through Wally, you talking at a gig one time you travelled to Scotland, Wally used you as a connection as a passport to Canada, did he?
A little bit, yeah. I wrote a supporting letter for his visa application. So, you know, I was happy for him to be over here in Canada, although he was in Winnipeg, which is about, I don't know, 2,000 miles away from here. So I didn't see him when he was in Winnipeg. He did come to Toronto. He flew into Toronto, and I took him to a baseball game, his very first baseball game. And and then I saw him again when he came back from Winnipeg and stayed at my mom and dad's for a little while. But he's like family now.
I second your feelings for Wally. I do like Wally myself. Wally's been good to me over the years, always sound advice. I've got a lot of time for Wally, millions of times. A good guy, 100%. Introduced me to some musicians as well I wouldn't have been introduced to, and different guys got us involved in that festival, and he's the kind of guy that just does things, Wally, as well. I like his attitude about things. He doesn't mess about. He does what he says he's going to do, type of guy, which I really like. I appreciate about him. He's up for anything as well. He goes for it straight away. I like that.
He's a great guy to bounce ideas off too. I've often done that with my changes in my work. I bounced ideas off him, you know, as recently as when I moved to the Humane Society, sending him a message and saying, hey, you got time for a catch up? I've got an offer and I want to run it by you. And he's always got a very direct idea of what's good and what might not be good, but also is just a great guy to just listen to you and kind of take what you say, distill it, and give it back to you, and you see it in a different perspective. He's really good like that.
I've found Wally to come at the issue. I use him as part of my network as well. So within what a couple of previous guys I've worked with, I'll still phone my technical services manager or previous project managers from time to time for different organisations. Just if a problem arises, it's a way to try and deal with something without dealing with it internally in your company at times, or if you try and get some insight for how other people have dealt with things. And I'll use Wally as well. Although he's in a different line for me, I'll phone Wally or send him an email. But I found Wally comes at it from a different angle. Usually he'll point out something that I just wasn't thinking about, and I'm like, brilliant, Wally, thanks very much. Quite a lot of time, which I appreciate about him. Aye.
He's gonna need to pay us for all this.
He's a big dafty as well, though. He's a big dafty. But we'll go back to the questions. There are just a couple left, Gord. What would you, career advice would you give to your 14-year-old self? Or I think that's
wow. You know what? And I've given this advice actually to teenagers that I know, and that is, you're under a great deal of pressure to choose what field you're going to go into after school. You know, from in our case, from high school, you have to choose what field you want to study in university or college, and then you have to move into that field and work in that field. And my advice is always, it feels like you don't have any time, but you have a lot of time, and you have a various number of careers that you can move into and out of and still maintain a good life and probably find the right role for yourself. So if you're feeling like you have to work in this field, don't feel that way. You have room to move. It's a much wider field. There's much more variety than you think. and much more time than you think. When you're 14, 15, 16, you're already trying to focus on what you want to be. I know at that point, I wanted to be a journalist. And I ended up being a journalist. It just took a lot longer than I expected, but I got all kinds of experience along the way. So I often give that advice: is you have more time than you think, and whatever career you go into may not be the career that you end up in. You have lots of time. You have time to go back to school if you want. You have time to try a new career. It feels like such a big thing at that moment. When you look back, you go, oh yeah, that worked out just fine. And sometimes it doesn't work out too, and you learn from that as well.
Gord, I'm roughly about the same age you were when you made the big leap out of the paper mill. You're 34, I'm 33 just now, so I can appreciate how big a leap that must have been. Don't have any kids myself, so that's added pressure or added responsibility for your move as well. But it's worked out for you, and so maybe sometimes you need to take a couple of steps back at times, or it might not be the right steps, but it works out in the end. And I kind of appreciate you saying that as well, for the fact that because I'm at that age, I've not really thought about that. I've been quite stuck in my mindset. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing, and I'm learning all the time, which is good. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy learning all the time. I'm challenged with different personalities every day, which I quite like. It's like people management, so you have to manage people as best as you can, which I enjoy that. I'm not the best at it all the time, but it's good to try and better yourself in personalities and how you cope with different personalities, because a lot of the people you deal with are challenging as well, because they're company owners with big personalities and big egos and strong backbones, and you have to try and manage each one in a different way. That went away off in a tangent there a wee bit. Is there any points at all that you would like to mention, and at all to do with your work, just before we wrap it up, Gord?
No, the only thing I would say is I've seen lots of friends of mine do very well in private business, and they have a great life and they enjoy themselves. What's worked for me is not for profit, and I always kind of give people advice that don't ignore the not-for-profit field. It gets a bad rap maybe for I made that comment way back at the beginning. I'm never going to get rich, but I have a good life. I don't need to get rich. I have a good life. I'll have enough money to have a decent retirement. I can travel where I want to. I have a good car. I can play the sports I want. I mean, those are the things that matter. How much you have in your bank account doesn't necessarily make you the happiest person. And I know there are lots of people who are struggling right now who would hear that and go, well, yeah, I'd be a lot happier with more money in my bank account. Maybe that's right. But there's a point where you have to look at your life and go, I'm doing what I want to do. I'm happy. I'm content. I have a good life. And that's in the not-for-profit field, in the charitable field. You can do that just as easily as you can in private business. And so I always tell people, don't put blinders on. Don't avoid charitable not-for-profit work, because it's good work and you feel good about yourself. And if you find something you connect with, that, for me, animals have been a big part of my life for my whole life. Going back to as a 8-year-old kid, our first dog. I've had dogs and cats all my life. And to be able to find that now, work in a field where I'm finding them homes and making people happy with companion animals, I couldn't think of a better end to every day.
Well, I think that's a really good message that I've not really thought about myself, that a career with kind of substance and something that's worthwhile provides maybe more value than what a big massive salary does, or more value to you than what any endless figure can.
I love it, and like I said, I'm not judging people that don't. That's fine. But for me, it makes a big difference for how I feel about myself, and I'm generally pretty happy about the way my life is, and part of that is the work that I do.
I've took something for that myself, Gord. I mean, definitely a good message from there. You can if your work's got substance attached to it, where you're helping out your community, you're helping out others, you're doing something for them, and there's the value that's taken for that. It can't be bought. You can't put it in the monetary. It's no a bank balance. It's how you feel. It's feeling good about yourself, feeling good about what you're doing, and feeling good about trying to make a better. It's a really good message. It's a really good message. Gord, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and it was really good to meet you for the first time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Adam. We'll have to get together when I'm over in Scotland. I was supposed to be there last June, and of course that didn't happen. So it likely won't be until next June. I don't think we're going to get there this year, but we'll make a stop in Beath for sure. And I think we're going to try and go over to Islay as well to visit a few of the distilleries on Islay.
I was going to say that earlier on, Gord. If you're over with the light of day or you're travelling over to Scotland, 100% send us a message on Facebook, and I'll make a point of coming down and catching up with yourself. 100%. That sounds good to me. I don't want to keep you any longer, Gord, because I do appreciate you coming on, and don't want to take up too much of your time. We'll just call it a day at that, and thanks very much for coming on, Gord.
Welcome to Do It Now, a platform for you to learn from those that have already done it. Do it now.